everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show, where we talk about all the crazy, stupid marketing stuff the internet wants to try and sell us, and have conversations that matter in helping us figure out what might we actually want to do from a marketing perspective. And today, I'm super excited for this conversation because it came up a while back in, when was that? November or December? Anyway, way last year, we were having a conversation and this concept of market research came up. And what do you know about your target audience? And what might you not know? And what do you need to know? And what data do we collect that we don't really need to know? And a whole bunch of stuff that came up. So I said, because Lynn brought it up on the last show, I was like, Lynn, you got to come back and we got to have a conversation about marketing research. And I'm excited because I titled this episode Marketing Research Enlightenment.
I know, that's pressure.
So, enlightenment is really just like, here's some perspectives that maybe you didn't know about market research. And let's talk about some of the things. So here's my rule about research in general. Mm-hmm. Is that if you're going to collect information from your people, you should do it so it's meaningful both for them and for you.
Yep.
Instead of just random data collection, which a lot of us have probably participated in. Some of us might have even done it before, where you get that data back and you're like, wow, this isn't actually helpful for me at all. And so this is a big conversation, as usual, on this show. And if you are checking in and listening to us live, please let us know that you are here and let us know your questions about market research. What are some things you've tried that worked? What are some things you tried that didn't work? What strategies have you used? What tactics have you used? How do you feel about that when you do it? All the things related to market research. And we're going to come up some new ideas today on how we can do it a little bit more meaningfully for both ourselves and for our potential clients. So before we hop into the conversation, Lynn, for those of you, for those people who missed you on that panel conversation, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what do you do in the marketing of
I do. Well, actually, I've tried to kind of distance myself a bit from marketing, from calling myself a marketer, only because, my positioning is wider than that. It's strategy. And I think also a lot of business owners really don't like marketing, which is part of the reason you do what you do. But I'm a lifelong marketer, pretty much my whole career. And now my specialization is positioning, helping others to specialize. I say unfocused consultants basically are my target. Target sounds bad, but these are market. These are market words.
Market research words. So might as well use them.
Yeah, I find hard to get rid of the marketing lingo, but yeah. So the people that I work with they tend to be very good at what they do, but they haven't been very strategic. They haven't focused as much. So this is where market research definitely has a role to play.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is actually a great place to start because, there are many things that you can research when you're doing market research. One of those things is positioning, right? So this is what you're an expert. So let's start there. In your experiences with your clients, what are some of the struggles people have when they're looking at actually surveying their potential client base from a positioning perspective?
Well, you see, positioning is about cutting a lot of things out, and people really do not like to get specific and to cut people out. This can help everybody. This is not for one specific person. The ideal client is bullshit. The whole, there's so much resistance to carving out a box. We always talk about think outside the box. Well, you need a container. You need to plant your flag. You need to be somewhere for people to find you. And that can't be a huge area. Like you can't own this huge area. So the resistance, I get it. But that is the biggest one. And when we start to talk, of course, it becomes clear that everybody has a preferred client that they like to work with. But nowadays, it's not cool to say that. And I'm here to say, like, be choosy, be picky, like eliminate all the pains in the butt. And yeah, be very selective about who you want to work with, because then everything gets better. Messaging, all your marketing, your strategy in general, what you offer, because you're giving it to somebody who really cares about it. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper then. I like what, I have to say quickly, hi to Peter and to Andrew in the audience.
Yes, hello.
Thanks for letting us know that you're
Thank
there.
you.
Peter says, think outside the box, color inside the lines. I like that. So, okay, because when I've seen a lot of research that collects demographic information. And so how I identify from a gender perspective, my age, maybe even like price points that I'm comfortable with. And I feel like all of this is demographic information. So when you are talking about like, some people hate the word niche. I actually like the word niche, but when we're looking at niching down, how do we, it's easy. I'm trying to figure out exactly what I want to ask here, but I feel like it's easy to ask questions about demographics because people know how they want to answer those, right? I most of the time know how I identify from a gender perspective. I know my age. They probably know if you're asking me about specific coaching services, what I might pay for those, right? And so those are easy, but what can we do that can actually help us narrow down those ideal clients in a more meaningful way for us as humans and for them as humans?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Stop with the categories, right? Like, we talked about this before, I think, too. The idea that, and I was just looking at research and I was like, there's no purpose to this, but like portioning it out by generation. I'm like, let's look at, so as much as I say get specific, it's finding out what matters specifically about something somebody wants to solve, but also what matters to them in their lives. Like, again, yes, psychographics, but I don't even want to call it psychographics. I just want to call it values and what's really kind of bugging you that you want to fix. Like, that's the core thing. Now, you can go by industry. You can say, like, I'm going to serve, dentists. That's fine. That's a form of demographic. But once you have that, you've got to get more meaningful, to your point about what makes humans tick in general, and what about the thing that you do is important to those people. So it's getting specific there, right? So would you want to work with, super nerds who, I don't know, like, again, that's a label, but it's also a shorthand for a lot of things that might matter to them.
Right.
And then you can dig in deeper. So people just want to feel understood. Mm-hmm. And you seeing that I look like maybe I identify as a woman, I look like maybe I'm in midlife or whatever, who cares? Like,
we were talking about this before we came on air about, like, seemingly the older we get, the more like childlike we become, which is like not available to you as the researcher if all you're asking is demographic information. And I think this is the key point for me. And I always look at my background when I have these types of conversations, because I have some Lego behind me. I have a map of Middle Earth.
Yeah.
Which some people will be like, what is that? And some people will be like, oh my God, that's awesome. These are things that I like. They're things that I like. They are not right or wrong things. They are just things that I like. And I always tell people the number of clients I have had who are also Lego fans is ridiculous. Not because they choose me because I like Lego, but because we have something in common, because we both like Lego. And when you have something in common with somebody, then you get to that trust factor a little bit faster, because you're like, oh, we're the same, right? Like, we're the same. We have this in common. And so when we're looking at this from a market research perspective, very rarely in the research I have seen, which is a lot, but not all of it by any means, it's very logical, it's very factual, and there's not a lot of ooey gooey goodness
Mm-hmm.
in it, right? Like it doesn't reveal any of those things about your people. So if it doesn't reveal any of those things about your people, then what's it doing?
Right. Well, I mean, here it's like the qualitative, quantitative, separation of research. I think for small businesses, at least the clients I work with, we're mainly focused on qualitative research, looking for data, like even Google Analytics, traffic, the things that you read in all the articles. Use these tools and check the trends and do the, okay, maybe for a little bit of exploration direction, but it's not going to really serve you very well in terms of helping you with your strategy and who your clients actually are. So what you're looking for really is there's a few things. How do they talk about the stuff that is bugging them or that they would like to get or that they're looking for, depending on what what your product is. So you're looking for how do they talk about it, but you're also looking for potentially something that's underserved or unmet needs, right? Like things that they may not even say, like, here's a thing that I wish existed. Wouldn't that be a gift?
That'd be super handy.
But it's usually, these are the kinds of things where they're saying something and you catch it and you go, oh, interesting. Like, I was doing this and then this didn't work. And you think, okay, I wonder, you have to kind of like read into it a little bit. So anyways, qualitative means talking to people is your best bet. And I think people get really excited about surveys and, this kind of thing, and they can be helpful. But I still think no matter where you are in your business, continue talking to your customers, and even better to the ones that you actually want or already have. But,
Well,
yeah.
I think that's an interesting point too, because I was having this conversation with someone yesterday about how there's people that we have done business with in our lives, whether that's from a service provider perspective or coworkers that we've had or clients that we've had in corporate or what have you, where there's those ones that you are like, yep, this is my favorite client. And you all have them, just like how nobody wants to talk about who their favorite kid is, even though they have one.
Yeah, they kind of change, but yes, they go back and forth. Like sometimes one's better than the other.
And this is why I have one, because then I can't change my mind. But like you have, I did a stint in customer service. I had favorite clients, right? And not that I like hated the other clients or like wouldn't serve the other clients, but I had favorite clients.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite clients were people where we had that more like human relationship, right? I knew what holidays they celebrated. My favorite one was like I went to Fort Lauderdale, Florida for work meetings, and then this client, they just have a boat, and we took the boat to dinner because in Fort Lauderdale you ride a boat like you ride a car, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And in landlocked Alberta, it's just not a thing.
Right.
But like you have those experiences with them that make them not like your best friend, but has that closer connection from a relationship perspective. And so when you look at that, and I love using this client as an example, because my two contacts at the company there were like probably double my age.
Yeah.
Right. They were like in my experience, they were like my cool uncles. Right.
Mm.
They had like completely different cultural background. They had a completely different way of life on a day-to-day basis. I worked in a tech industry. They worked in a like retail product industry. With like, if you looked at us from the outside, you'd be like, these people don't have anything in common. They would not be ideal clients for each other. But it was none of those external factors that actually made the connection make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, when I think about it, I'm like, I don't really know, besides the fact I was being me and they were being them, and somehow that was compatible.
Yeah.
And when we look at this from a market research perspective, very often we think about just them, right? So, okay, if that was my ideal client, then what I'm looking for is white men in their 60s who have a product business. And you're like, well, I mean, I don't get excited about all of that. Actually, I don't actually get excited about most of that because none of those things are the meaningful things, right? My favorite thing about that client was they wanted a partner. They wanted a partner who was an expert in an industry that they were not an expert in, that they had no interest in being an expert in, but wanted to be advised in so that their business could be digital. And I was like, oh, yes, I want to be a partner. I want to be consultative. I want to. There were ideas that they had, and I was like, no, it's like a terrible idea. You should not do it. We've done it with other clients. It didn't work, right? Like, don't do it. And then I like to be a trusted advisor. They were looking for a trusted advisor. That's why that worked. But most of the time, we don't think about surveying those types of things. And partially because it's a little bit tricky to survey those types of things. So, Lynn, in your experience, what have you seen people try? What have you seen that has worked in terms of surveying more of that like humanness? Like, I'm probably not going to put on my survey, do you collect Lego? Right?
You could.
I could. Yeah. Just because then I have all of the references I can make about building bridges and connecting things.
Yeah.
Like, it's fun for me. But like, I'd love to hear some of the things that you've seen work either for yourself or for clients.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to kind of set aside the bigger product, like the CPG clients I've worked with, just because it wasn't as interesting. And I'm going to go again with the small businesses. And when I say small businesses, obviously that can be anything, but I'm thinking like 1 to 10 people, but it could be up to 200, wherever somebody's definition is. I think the focus on the non-buyers is a little strange. So we, for whatever reason, many people that I've worked with saw that as their most compelling quote unquote data. So we're going to send out a survey and ask, why didn't you buy? After a launch or after something like that. I forget which book it was, maybe one of the Heath brothers books or whatever, where they were like, let's take a look at what works first, right? Versus let's go try and fix the problem, because those people who didn't buy, like, they're self-selecting as non-buyers. So let's, again, just focus on the people who have some interest. And, yes, sometimes they didn't buy, but they're still interested. I get that. But I think really focusing on the positive. So if you do have clients already and you have these guys that you really loved, spend time talking to them about, so like you said, they wanted to be partners. So that's like the dynamic between the two of you, between, like, as a relationship. That's important. What kind of relationship do you want with your clients? That's hard to tease out in when you're asking questions. But you can ask questions that are meaningful about, and again, there's some typical ones like, why, like, what about this service product made you decide to buy and what were you struggling with before you bought this, and what were you trying? And, there's all of these things. But then I would say things like, do you like Lego? Has merit, especially if it's not just like, I'm going to throw this in to make it more interesting for myself, but it has meaning for you. You have found a pattern that with your clients, they tend to be, let's say, a little bit more nerdy adults who still like to play with Lego, and that, maps out to these 4 or 5 other values. Again, you would find that out. You don't have to talk to that many people. Let's say sometimes it's 10, usually no more than 20. If you're talking to you're closer to your best fit clients, this stuff will rise up. And those questions can actually tell you a lot. It'll open a conversation, like part of the conversation that you wouldn't have just talking about the service. Now, it's important to talk about your service or offer, of course, but it does kind of, I don't know, people also want to be like helpful, right? And I will put on my helpful self, and I will tell you about your product, and I will try to make good points. Like, and I'm not saying like that's what we're saying, but it's a feeling that we have. Usually the best kind of people are like that. They really want to help you. So they put that helpful, hat on, or however you want to say it. I know I do it.
I for sure do it. Yeah. I feel like I have a whole helpful, I wouldn't say it's a full persona, because I feel like I'm just helpful as a person, but I always feel like it's more inauthentic for me not to help somebody
Yeah.
than it would be
Yes.
to help somebody. And I'm trying
Yeah.
to be myself, so myself is a helper.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a bias there. We all had that. So I think that those you don't want to fill up with questions about all these things, but there might be one meaningful one like that that can help. And
Mhm.
again, you can tweak those questions as you ask more people questions, like, you have more interviews. You could be like, well, that was very useful. I'm going to keep that in or take it out. Don't be afraid to not have all the exact same questions either. I think like, yes, there is something about obviously keeping your data robust and all that when you're talking big numbers and you're going to be like dicing and you have to have things be the same. But when we're talking qualitative, smaller, you can play around a bit because it'll just get you more meaningful, knowledge, insights as you move into the next interview. So don't be afraid to do that because you're not like going, here's what everybody said. Let's compare all their answers. It's a lot more like I took notes with my gut. I felt this. This was a thing that rose above. You don't need to be very measured about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is important because I remember I used to work in a digital company. So we had a data analyst who was on staff, analyze all the data. And he would always say, you have to have 1,000 responses for it to be a meaningful data set.
Right.
Which I always thought was ridiculous because we sold a very small amount of projects for like big high ticket. We don't have 1,000 data points. I don't know if we'll ever have 1,000 data points. But our clients mostly had thousands of data points, so it didn't really matter. And that's what he was there for. But from a small business perspective, especially from a solopreneur perspective, a solopreneur who's selling a high ticket service, you probably aren't trying to go for thousands of clients a year. Gonna guess you couldn't actually facilitate that.
Right.
I had a conversation with a client lately who does like big machinery installations. Or like, how many of these can you realistically do in a quarter?
Right.
So we're talking about inbound marketing. I don't want to get 100 leads if you need 5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I want to get the good 5. So we're like streamlining all of the efforts. And so often I think our brains get overwhelmed with the desire to have lots of data. And I need to have lots of data to make these decisions. And if you're Pepsi and Coca-Cola and you have all of those data points, cool, go to town. But most of us don't need that many data points. So it's also important to look at like, am I doing a survey, like an automated Survey Monkey or whatever, because I think I need to get 100 responses? Or could I just survey my top 5 clients and like start to find patterns?
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of different, so this is where I wanted to go next with the conversation. I also want to remind everyone who's watching live that if you have a question or an experience or an insight or anything on this conversation, please add it to the chat. We would love to hear your voices as well. When it comes to like the execution strategy of a survey, and whether that is like having a one-on-one conversation and having an open flow conversation and collecting information, or if you have predefined questions, or you have the like email survey or whatever you're doing out, is there things that you have seen that work better for specific people, like in terms of an alignment and match? Are we overkilling it with email surveys if we're not in a CPG business, right? Like, okay, if I'm trying to figure out people's experience of this bag of chips that I sell, then yeah, survey. It's unreasonable for me to have a person making calls to figure out about that when the product costs 99 cents, right? But when I'm selling a service that's like thousands of dollars, do I need that? And does that hurt that? So I'd love to hear your opinion in the overall like brand experience perspective of market research, how it can align or break the brand experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, it's market research, which is really more get constant, consistent feedback at any time, right? So there's market research if you're doing a new offer and it's like new people that you want to go after, that's a different beast. But if you're talking about your existing clients, always be looking for feedback. And I think most of us wouldn't admit how very little we do that. We're afraid of it, honestly. You feel like some people are telling you this is great. So you're like, I'm getting feedback. They're telling me, right? But you really do want to see what you can do about getting feedback from people who aren't like just offering it up, because that might be more telling, right? Like you might get more. It's like looking at the 3-star review versus the 5-star review. You're going to get more nuance in there. So you have to be okay with some things not being so great. And sometimes that's during your working relationship. Again, ongoing feedback as you work with somebody, depending on how you're doing it, is really important. And like actually saying, listen, I want to check in. Now, a lot of people will just be like, yeah, everything's great. This is the other thing, right? It's very difficult. So I am a fan of, hybrid and figuring it out. So if you do have like a fairly sizable email list and, or even not, doesn't matter, but like sending out an anonymized survey can really work there, because the people who may feel a bit sheepish about telling you something will do it. And I say anonymized, like for sure, just don't ask for their email in that survey, make it anonymous, because you'll find out something different than you would otherwise. But always keeping that communication open. So I do like the 1 question email. So it's not a formal survey. Now that's not anonymous, of course, because you reply to the email. But if it's juicy, if it's like, tell me what this week has brought to you in your business, or tell me like something like that, where you're almost having a conversation with a friend that you would ask, treat it like that. Like you're very curious about these people's daily lives, what's going on for them, so that it's not always like I've got marketing research on the brain and I have to get some data, right? It's just more this ongoing 2-way communication that we can get. So I don't know if that quite answered the question. I just think like it's not so much about being methodical as it is being consistently open to getting feedback, and then in slightly different ways probably makes sense depending on what you want.
It's interesting because for a while there anyway, I don't know if it's like as overwhelming now, but for a while everyone was just like NPS surveys, which means net promoter score, if you're unfamiliar with the phrase. It's a way of asking people, how likely are you to recommend our business, which I think is a great question. Now, the thing about it, if you actually executed it from an NPS methodology perspective, the requirements are that you follow up with every single group of people. So they group the responses into 3 different categories. 0 to 3 are severe detractors, and those are people who are likely to speak poorly of your business in public. There's 4 to 6, which are still considered detractors. Notice the scale there, everyone. Above a 5, still a detractor, because they're not promoting you. Those people likely won't say anything. They didn't have an overly bad experience, but they didn't have an overly good experience. But they're definitely not going to be sharing you or recommending you with the people that they know. People who are 7 to 10 are your promoters. And then they actually sub-break those too. So you have like promoters and then champions, which are 9 and 10s. Now, the methodology is that anybody who is a severe detractor, you're supposed to follow up with them within 24 hours. So if they have given you that poor of feedback, then there should be someone capable and available on your team to follow up with them within the next 24 hours. So if you're implementing a methodology like that on an ongoing basis, like you are doing deliveries, and then every time you do one, you ask somebody for an NPS score, really you need to have the operational support to be able to maintain that methodology. Because if you don't, what you're doing is kind of where I started this conversation, right? You're asking people for feedback that you're not going to use. Yeah. And I actually had a client once who was like, okay, we're going to do this whole methodology. And they ran it for like 45 days. And I was like, you guys, what's the operational support for this, right? Like, who's doing the calls? They're like, how is this follow-up happening? Oh no, we're not doing any of that. We just want to create a benchmark for ourselves. That is Yeah, that's selfish. That has no value for the customer at all. And it could have had value for the customer because you had created an opportunity for you to follow up with them to improve that experience. But alas, you didn't. So you made it all about you. And this is one of the biggest problems I have with market research. It kind of ties into what Peter is sharing here too about surveys with push questions, raise a false sense of achievement, or a total waste of time, energy, money, and goodwill. I agree. And there's something to be said there too about like leading questions, but we'll get there in a minute. When it comes to like collecting information, who are you doing it for? And I think this is an important question to ask yourself before you go into market research mode, because again, most companies, probably companies more so than individuals, but some individuals get caught up in this too, is that I'm doing market research for me. Okay? Doing market research for me to learn about my clients so I can sell them stuff. That's all about you. And what if we just broadened that a little bit into like, how is this market research about us? Because at the end of the day, you have the opportunity to potentially solve a problem that someone has, which creates an us agreement. And I just believe that it's short-sighted to not take that into consideration when we're doing our market research. And then if we get, Peter's talking about goodwill, if I send out enough surveys and you fill them in, and I haven't changed the experience of you with my brand, you're going to stop filling in my surveys. And I'm going to continually chip away at that goodwill that you did have, and I'm going to like slowly erode it until it doesn't exist, which is a terrible plan because I don't know if the numbers are different now in the digital environment, but they used to always say it costs 7 times more to get a new client than it does to maintain an existing client. So let's not erode the goodwill of our existing clients by doing these types of activities. And I'll be with you, I've had a couple of people in my education is in market research. So if anybody asks me to do market research, I always say yes. Mostly because I'm curious about how they're doing market research and are you collecting good data? And like I said, most of the surveys I complete, I'm just like, really? What were you trying to accomplish with this question? Because I can't even figure it out. So many times we're just like asking them for stuff that doesn't make my experience better as somebody who filled out a survey. So if we look at that, and I think some people might avoid them like the plague, but most of us have done a survey of some type in our history, whether that's a multiple choice question on an exam when we were in school. We've done surveys, right? And so like, how did they feel for you? And if you were going to do a survey, how would you want it to feel to your people? And just, there's not necessarily right or wrong answers in that arena, but just having that intention of exploring how is this a we activity, I think can add a lot of value to market research in general.
Oh, definitely. And I have clicked on surveys and you get the feeling right away. It's like, you want me to do your work for you. And you know what? That's ridiculous. Like, honestly, like I'll start with good intentions and then the questions are like insane and they keep going. And it's very much like you are here to serve us so that, we can put these numbers in the machine and check a box that we did it or whatever. Yes, I know I'm coming at it from knowing how it is, but it still would feel like that, I think, to most people. It's just like, are you kidding me? Why are you making me think so much? Like, again, like that's ridiculous, right? So yeah, the we thing doesn't come across, I would say, in most of the surveys I've seen. And, with all the tech and the knowledge and the things we have nowadays, it hasn't gotten better. It's very rare that I see like, oh, here's a different and refreshing way to get my feedback. Like it almost never happens. It's really frustrating. Anyway, so yeah. Well, and that's the other piece. Like, who are the people who continued through? You got to ask yourself that question too. Like, is that really the kind of client, the customer you want, the person who's willing to give you their soul? I don't know, maybe it is, but probably not. Like there's the flavor of the person who'll do that too, that you have to take into account. That's like so weird to me. I don't know.
But there's also like so many places where people make it an option to just like provide non-useful feedback, right?
Yes.
You give me NAs, and so I can just go NA, 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 and like that doesn't give you anything. Why don't you do a survey asking specifically clients who use this feature about the feature? I just did one. I just did one for like a platform, and I was like, I have the free version of it, and I filled that in the survey because it asks you like, what level of membership do you have? I have a free one, and then it asks me about all of these features that you get in not the free version. So
Yeah.
I'm like, no, like
Yeah.
NA, because I don't have any feedback. And then then they ask me like, would you upgrade for any of these things? I'm like, no, I have a free account for a reason. I told you I have a free account.
I know. It's crazy, right? There is no excuse for that because even without tech, without a lot of tech, you can figure out how to segment people out.
Yeah.
Like I could send it, okay, this is the one that goes to people who are on the free plan. I could do that now, and I only have like a small tech stack. Like that's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's just, again, it's not trying very hard. And market research at the end of the day is like, no, if you're just doing it so that your life is easier, but your client's life gets harder, this is going to be a very
And I
short-lived
actually would
marketing
make
research
the
strategy.
argument that they're not doing it to make their lives easier either. I think they overcomplicate.
It's true. They think maybe they're doing it to
Yeah.
make their lives easier, but they end up overcomplicating it, and then
Like
everybody's like,
the more we have, the better. You know what? No, it almost
right.
never is that way. So
Mhm.
don't do that. Plus, yeah, your survey is part of the customer experience. And to your point, now you have this experience with that platform. Trust has got to be eroded a little bit. It's like, well, you can't even get your shit together you can't even get your whatever the word is there, your stuff together for this. So I don't know what's going on here. Like, and obviously your marketers aren't the ones creating the software, but you're not doing that math. You're just kind of going, oh,
But it's also like in my experience working in a larger company where we have a client success team, like these are the people who talk to the clients on a daily basis.
yeah,
These people have no say into the market research that gets done. We let the
right.
marketing
It's
team do the
crazy.
market research. And you're like, but like I know things about these clients, and I know things about the clients that will help us decide like we want a profile like this of clients, right? We don't want a profile like those people. We, like most businesses, had clients who are like pretty much break even clients where you're like, I don't want more of these because I have one of these because they started with us long ago and we like partnered with them down the road. So they get this like special. I don't want more people like that. They only want to do this because they're getting a deal. I don't want more people like that. I want more people like that who are super jazzed about paying the higher price. And not because it's like priced out of the market, but because they are paying for a trusted advisor. They're not paying for the like tech stack. They're paying for that. I want more people to pay for that. I don't want more of those people. So you can't even just create like a generic profile from all my clients because all my clients are not created equal.
Yeah.
And when you're an individual person, you have the full capacity to be able to create this way, but you also have to have the intention of creating that way. And looking at your clients and saying, I would want more of those clients and less of those clients. Like personally, if I never had anybody who ever asked me for copywriting again, and now I just like hard no it to everybody, like I know I'm not a copywriter. I do not want those clients. I don't even want to talk to anybody who's remotely interested in finding some kind of copywriting service because that's like the exact opposite of what I'm going to encourage you to do, which is create your own content, right? So that's not right for me, but that doesn't manifest itself if I just ask for people how many people are in your company and what's your annual revenue and what is your tech stack, right? Like none of that is helpful. So it's just about intentionally going into it and being like, okay, this is supposed to have value. Well, let's just say it could have value for both me and my people. So who are my people? And what would create value for them? And I think the important thing on that note too is you might get it wrong.
Yeah.
Market research, just like everything else in marketing, is a constant evolution. We ask a question, we get some data back, and we're like, oh, nuts. That wasn't a very good question because it didn't answer the question I was trying to answer. So now I need to restructure that and try it again. Very commonly, I see people asking like 2 questions in one question. So like, how often do you feel stress or anxiety at work? Okay, well, stress might be like work-related stress, and I like have a high-level job, so I feel stress a lot, but I don't feel anxiety about my stress a lot. So I don't know how to answer this question because those are 2 different things for me. And again, I think people often think that makes it easier. I'm going to slam these 2 things together, but this actually made it much more complicated for the surveyee because how do I answer this? I can't answer it well. I always use this example. So when I was pregnant, every time I would go in for a checkup, they would make you fill in this survey. It's mostly about your mental health while you're going through the process, which from a like gathering data perspective, I think is good, right? It helps create red flags for specific people and identify potential supports. But the scale they gave you was from 0 to 1. How do we do this, right? Like 0 would be never, 1 would be always. So I'm like a 0.2. How many times did I feel it this week? Is that how I'm supposed to measure this? Right? Like it would have been a lot easier if you had given me like, okay, between these 2 appointments, it was a month, right? Like how many weeks did you feel like this? Even that is like, I don't know. I felt it for like a moment, 1 week out of 4 weeks. Like, I don't know. How do I answer this? And so you're a human. I think, I don't know, maybe AI is listening and it's not a human. But we participating in this conversation are humans. We have the ability to extrapolate what might somebody experience of this. If I was doing it, removing myself from the surveyor perspective, if I was the surveyee, how would I experience this? And this is one of the things I love to do for like my friends is they're like, oh, I'm going to be surveying people. I'm like, great, send me the survey first because I can point out where we might not be collecting data that's helpful for each other. But there's that opportunity to put yourself, I mean, okay, let's talk about this for a second, Lynn, because this whole concept of like putting yourself in your client's shoes. I mean, this is another thing that you could do on a constant, consistent basis when you're exploring your marketing or when you're exploring your surveys or when you're exploring your packages or when you're exploring your pricing or when you're exploring pretty much anything that's associated with your business. So is there anything that you have done or that you've seen your clients do that allows them to nobody can 100% know what another human is thinking or experiencing, but that allows them to put themselves in the shoes of their clients?
Well, I mean, I think there's part of that is your personality and how empathetic you are, but there's also the one thing is you are not your client. First, I want to say that. We often conflate, like, especially again on a smaller scale, that I wouldn't do this or I wouldn't, like we need to separate ourselves out. Your client is definitely different than you, even if you really like them. So keep that in mind. That being said, so that means you're open to different things than what you think you might do or how you might react, right? So you want to keep open for that. But it's also, humans as special snowflakes as we like to think we are we have very basic, similar desires, universal needs, desires. Maslow's hierarchy wouldn't be mentioned 80 million times on everywhere if it didn't have truth to it. We are looking to satisfy similar needs. So if you think of it that way and you're like, on any given day, what am I doing? I'm trying to avoid pain. And that includes the stress of your stupid survey, right? What I find interesting is that when you do a survey, it's you're annoyed. But when you are the surveyor, now all of a sudden you can kind of compartmentalize and go, well, again, it's like, I need this or I need that. And you're not thinking of it as, what's this going to be like for the other person? And in that way, you can say, well, I know taking a survey is an extra step and I blah, blah, blah. You can do it that way. You can think of those things. But it kills me that we so easily kind of go into that mode of this is me now. Like there was again, when you're the surveyor, there was a poster in the train station that like had like slow down, for pedestrians or whatever for the cars driving. And I remember thinking, well, you're the pedestrian sometimes. Like this isn't like there are only pedestrians in the world and there are only drivers in the world. It's like we go between the two. And yet when I'm in the car, I'm no longer that person. So it's the same. Like when I'm the survey creator, I'm now the survey creator. It's crazy to me that we do that. So I think to your point, it's making sure you step back into when I've done survey, like also I am not, just the creator of a survey. I'm also somebody who does these. Like, I don't know, maybe that's like that's going way too far, but it's working with the weird human brains of like.
Well, and I think it's just an interesting perspective to take into it. If you're like, I should do market research and this is why I should do it. And all of that is external, right? And being able to look at an opportunity to do research and look at it like that. Like I always think about it as like a scientist at a like microscope, right? I'm researching a thing and like I don't necessarily have a set list of things I'm researching about it. I'm looking at it, I'm asking questions, I'm like being with it, I'm experiencing what it does. Right now I'm thinking like amoebas and stuff and how they move. And so like I'm just I'm there, I'm observing. Mm-hmm. And this is where like I wanted to come back to this concept of leading questions. And I don't know that people who are not in market research know what a leading question is, but a leading question is me asking a question to lead you to a specific answer. Mm-hmm. So this I would consider manipulative to some degree, not because you're not manipulating someone into buying anything or anything like that, but you're not getting their clean thoughts. You have led them in a specific direction. So now the likelihood of them saying yes or agreeing with the direction you led them is high. Mm-hmm. Now, that is mostly unhelpful from a pure market research perspective, because I don't know that the client would have said that if I had asked them a neutral question. And so, and you can, things like this, like, would you do this or this? And, well, I might not do either of those things, but I have to pick one of those. So now I'm going to tell you that I'm going to choose this one. You don't know that that's actually true. So is that data helpful? It's possible, but we don't know, right? Mm-hmm. It could be good data. It could be garbage data. We don't know. And now we have good data mixed in with garbage data, and it's not helpful to us, and nor is it helpful, again, to the person who filled in the survey. And so looking at your survey questions from that perspective and being like, am I only giving people two directions to go? Can I like very minimally put I'd do something else category, right, in your multiple choice selection, which I think is actually a great thing too, because if I give people open answers, and if I know that there's like 5 things that people typically do, sure, maybe I can put those 5 things in there. But if I also give them that option for open answers, I get to learn something new. Plus, I have a reason to follow up with somebody. Like, hey, like you provided a really unique answer for this component of the survey. I would love to like dive into that with you if you're open to it. It's an opportunity to have a conversation with a person, which I always think is great. Yeah, so again, you might think like, oh, I don't want to do that because then I have uncategorized data and I don't want to have uncategorized data. But how many surveys did you do? 8, 12, like 20? Okay. The number of people who are going to respond that way, I don't know, handful, right? Maybe you have 5. So like, could your brain handle that discrepancy? Probably. And just create the space for us to actually get the meaningful answers.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know that we're running out of time because we always run out of time on the show. But I want to talk about one more thing, and this is this idea of even doing market research in the first place, right? So there's one thing when we're talking about this constant and consistent feedback, which is really like, now we have clients, we're providing services, we want to get consistent feedback, we want to make sure we're growing in an authentic way, we want to make sure we're serving our customers in the way we want to. That's one side of market research. The other side of market research is I'm trying to figure out if I have a market here, right? I haven't sold anything yet. I have an idea. I think it could be helpful to this group of people, but I don't know that. So I'm going to do some market research to see if there's market potential. This one is always really interesting for me because if you treat that style of market research the same way you treat the like follow-up style of market research, you'll end up either asking leading questions, again, because there's an assumption that this person needs this service. If someone's bought it from you, there's an assumption that they need it, right? Mm-hmm. But if they haven't bought anything like that before, then they may not know how to answer the questions you're looking to answer. So this is an important creationary piece of that type of market research is, what am I actually trying to learn? And I always call it a hypothesis, right? So just like we did in science class in high school, we come up with a hypothesis. I think that when I combine hydrogen with oxygen, I'm going to get water. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it works depending on how you combine it and like what percentages, right? And sometimes it doesn't work, but you have a hypothesis of something that might happen. And so what I've seen a lot, Lynn, is like people go into that kind of preliminary market research and they don't give people any hypothesis to test. Okay. Right. So but they usually have a hypothesis. So in our heads, like you mentioned earlier, usually we notice a gap and therefore we think like, oh, this type of solution will fill or could fill that gap. I don't know if it will. I don't know if people are ready to consume it that way, but like, I think this is what it would take to fill this gap. So you actually have a hypothesis, but people get so afraid that that's their idea and they don't want to project their idea onto a potential audience that they completely filter that out of the market research. And then the questions I always think of are like, if you were going to consume a product like this, how would you want to consume it? Like, how am I supposed to know that as the respondent, right? But it would be easier for me to answer the question if you were like, a potential structure for offering this type of service is this, whatever structure you've thought of. Does that feel like a way you might consume this type of service? Then I can say yes or no, right? Because I've been given a defined box so that I can color inside the lines. And then also the payment question. What would you pay for this? Okay, well, what I would pay for this and what someone else would pay for it, even if we're in the same demographic group, is completely different because we have different ways of being, we have different needs, we have different experiences. And so if you haven't collected any of that data, just asking me what I would price it at is not overly helpful to you. Plus, then you also, I mean, in general, people want to pay as little as possible for a thing, right? So if you're going to give me like pricing categories, I'd be like, I think this one, right? But I don't know the value of your service, so I haven't actually valued your service. I have just told you what are comfortable price ranges I am. And I always think it's like, if you can get creative with your questions, I always think about spends in terms of how many Starbucks that would be. Okay, so if I go to Starbucks and get my husband and I a drink, it's $13, which is crazy now. Like, I don't know, when did that happen? But anyway, it's a spend that we make pretty consistently, a couple times a week. And so I know that. So when I'm estimating like, okay, so the value of me getting a Starbucks is $13. The value I associate with that service is X amount of Starbucks. And then my question I ask myself is, how many Starbucks would I trade for that? Okay. And so there's some fun you can have with those questions, right? Like, if this was something that was available for you, how many Starbucks would you trade for that?
Right.
And then you can give people a framework of like, a Starbucks is like $7 now. Isn't that crazy? And add some personality to it if you feel like it. But there's I just wanted to outline the dangers of those two different types of market research, because market research is not all created equal.
No.
Just like follow-ups are not all created equal, and businesses are not all created equal.
Yeah. I'd be also just mindful of the hypothetical. So hypothesis is great. But we are terrible at guessing how much we value something.
Mhm.
We're terrible for ourselves to know what makes us really happy.
Mhm.
You know, there's a thing of like mimetic desire, like we actually desire what's put in front. Like it's very hard to tease out what will actually matter to us in the time that we're going to purchase the thing.
Right.
You know, because yeah, think about it. Before Starbucks or whatever, if anybody ever said like, would you be willing to spend $13 for 2 drinks, whatever, you'd be like, that's insane. But we all did it. So I'm a big fan here of, I mean, this isn't going to work all the time, but if it's a new offer that you can somehow explain pretty well. Noah Kagan does this, right, with his $1 million business in a weekend, his framework for that. He's a big fan of, here's how you validate the idea. Get people to give you money for it. So if it's like a refundable deposit, he'll say that sometimes, like a $50 refundable deposit. But the idea is this. I say, I'm thinking of doing this thing. Would you buy this kind of, you know, whatever I've just created, this offer, outline it. And if you're talking to the right person and they say, yeah, and you go, okay, I'm going to create it. So if you want to, $50 refundable deposit. Now, it's not going to work in every instance, but be mindful that research will keep you from taking action sometimes as well, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not a big fan of skipping research entirely, because I think then you still want to find out more about the people who put the money down and you know, to fuel that. But aside from that, if that's not possible, which it should be in some way, shape, or form for a lot of people, but if it isn't, yeah, like getting creative with the questions you ask is good. And then I would say also even just, you know, making sure that like, well, not making sure, understanding that this is just a direction. Like it's not as solid as some of the stuff where somebody has actually taken action. Now we're just talking in hypotheticals. So it's a direction to go.
Mhm.
So, but don't spend too much time there, right? Because we love that piece. Because look, everybody loved this idea. How many people do you know of who said like, so many people said they loved it and they were going to buy it, and then I did it and nobody did, right?
Mhm.
So you don't want to go too far into that. So you have to get close as possible to getting paid for the thing in some way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. So
Yeah.
there's that.
I love that. It's a great idea to do the like refundable down payment, right?
Yeah.
Because it allows you to make a commitment that's not really a commitment,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to pay this today, but if I end up not doing it, it's going to be refundable, and like I don't have to be too concerned about it. But these are also the types of things where I encourage people to get creative, right? If you are at like a no sales place right now in your business and you're trying to find ways to get somebody to proof of concept it for you. And I know from a technology perspective, a lot of people want to do like free demos and free users and all of these types of things. But I've seen it happen one too many times where like this is free and it's something that's not part of their regular workflow right now. So might they want it from a desire perspective? Sure. I'm not saying that that's not true. And at the same time, we had this whole beta crew that didn't actually do the beta because they didn't have that desire to do that. And it's the same reason why people do paid events instead of free events, right? Is that if I make you pay for an event, the likelihood that you're going to think about whether or not you want to attend this
Right.
is much higher than if I just say it's free. Because if it's free, just sign up, right? Great.
Mhm.
But even in like from a market research perspective. But this is where I also like I come back to the hypothesis, right? Again, like not that none of us are seers and can predict the future. But when we like, okay, this was the idea I had. I had an idea of doing this as a workshop. This was like how long it would take. So this is my like kind of working hourly rate. So this is what I would price it at. Right? And you've probably done some research even there, like what are your competitors pricing at and all of these different things. So like you have an idea of how you would offer it. And so like ask the people. Ask the people if that is something they're and like who knows, even give them that option or a link from the market research to say like, hey, if you want to go like reserve your seat for it now, boop, here you go to town. There's like just like with every one of these episodes, we just opened a huge can of worms, and there's so many different opportunities. I do think there are a lot of great things we talked about, primarily from an intention perspective, right? So when we go into market research, what are we doing? Right? Know what you're doing, know why you're doing it, know what group you're doing it with. Is this people like, do you have sales? Are you surveying people who are longtime clients, right? Know that going into it because you can customize things to that. And then also ask yourself, what would you do, right? How would I do it? And maybe you have a nice little template you can start with. And I always think templates are great because it's easier to start from something than it is to start from nothing. But also look at it and be like, would I ask that? Would I ask it that way? Like, how do I talk about that? How would I want my customers to be able to understand that, right? Is that going to serve me or and them, or is it not going to serve me? And just get a little curious. Get a little curious. Ask yourself some questions before you question a whole bunch of other people for their feedback about your business. Lynn, is there anything else that you would say from a wrap-up perspective or things that people should for sure make sure they take away?
I would just say, I think for most research, market research, whatever kind of research, especially when it comes to your clients, what you should be thinking about framing it as is, I want to tease out what the value they see in this is. So it's not about features, it's not even about benefits. It's about what is it that makes them care about this particular offer, service, working with me. And that's like, I know I'm leaving that, it's like a huge concept and I'm thinking about value more and more, but it's not even just straight up, I get so much more value money-wise from this. It's how much, like, I will pay more for this because I value it. It's very hard to tease that out in a survey, but in quality, like in conversations, try to see what you can do to find out what it is that makes them care.
Mm-hmm.
Because
And
that's, yeah.
yeah, something I would add on to that too is like try not to let your own assumptions about what they value cloud their potential responses.
Yeah.
That's another thing I've seen happen quite often.
Say. Do you know how many times people get like over and over the same kind of thing? People are telling them, I love this part or I like whatever. And they resist making the change to like highlight that thing or, to do it for like a long time. So, also go in thinking I'm also open to actually changing my message, changing the offer if I need to, based on this feedback. We don't like change so much. So you want to do that. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, if we're not interested in changing anything, then there's actually very little value in surveying your people. Right?
We think we are, but what it is after the fact, you got to stick it out. You got to go and do it.
Right.
At least test.
Yeah, I was gonna say you don't have to because there's lots of companies that don't. But would you do that, right? Would you, from your company or your as an individual perspective, would you survey somebody and then ignore them? And it would be like calling them to have a conversation so you could ignore them. Would you spend your time doing that?
All the time. So don't do that.
Yeah, please don't. Hello, Lynn. Thank you so much. Thank you to Peter, Andrew, and James who are in the chat. If you were watching this live and you were like, I'm not quite ready to ask a question in the chat, or you're watching it on replay and you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and tag Lynn and myself, and we can come back and we can answer any questions that you might have on a replay, or feel free to connect with either of us. Lynn, where is the best place for people to connect?
Well, on LinkedIn. Boom. Connect, baby.
Let's do it. And if you have watched the show often, you will know this part, but I'm going to tell you that if market research is something that is in your realm of exploration right now, and you were here today and you're like, oh, great, I have all of the answers from market research. Not really a thing. This is a conversation starter. It's an ongoing conversation. It evolves with you as your business evolves and as your clients evolve. So the market research conversation is ongoing. And the best way to stay up to date is to stay in the conversation. So connect with myself, connect with Lynn, connect with the other people in the chat or other people who have RSVP'd to this event, because those are people who are interested in exploring market research from a meaningful perspective. And very minimally, these are people where you can try on your ideas. And we all promise not to judge each other, right, friends? We won't judge your terrible survey questions. We will help you create some better ways to connect with your people that are more meaningful to you and more meaningful to them. Lynn, thanks so much again for all your expertise today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, permission to do you.